did, I tried to look at DNFBP, why they're calling and what the term defines to. So first, what I did is I just broke the words into a simple analogy: designated, non-financial, business, and professional. The first thing which came as designated is where you give an appointment to someone as a special office or a post. So we need to be very clear. We are being designated. If I'm also part of a DNFBP, so that let me give a very straight framework. We are being designated to do some specific act or a specific office or a post. Now, this is a very strong word, designated word, and it is coming with a lot of responsibilities also. And first we look at how these are evolving into, and then comes a non-financial, so someone not part of financial industry, as simple as that, and who is doing some specific business and profession, which is being defined in the framework. So when I use this word and when I look at DNFBP, the designated word took me my most attention, because that's a word which we have seen, and very specifically for some important roles or some important acts which need to be conducted by DNFBPs. Now, what the law has done broadly, if I just give you a perspective, DNFBPs are classified into broadly 4 categories, but there's a lot of detailing which is there. I'll go one by one, and we'll even go through why we are talking about those elements and which are the critical activities which need to be looked and assessed before we say whether we are in the category of DNFBPs or not. Now, why need to identify DNFBP? Because if we or whoever is assessing his business or their business as DNFBP, there is a lot of actions, like we need to register for GoAML, we need to ensure that we have a compliance framework, we need to have a compliance officer. So a lot of actions are required. But before getting into those actions, let's understand what is DNFBP defined into. I'm going to go a little more in detail because that's where a lot of questions are coming in. I'll be happy if someone has any question, please raise your hand in the system so that we can even bring those questions as a discussion item also. So the first point, which clearly says broker and real estate agent, when they conclude operations for the benefit of the customer with respect to purchase and sale of real estate. Now, the critical points which are coming up here is when they conclude operations, that means you are acting in for your clients, either on the sales side or on the purchase side. That means you are doing some kind of role activity in that process. What I did, I just brought up the guidance note which is issued in the document also, which gives me 3 broad pointers. They said first, where the real estate agent is acting as and doing some negotiation and execution of agreement or a contract. That means the negotiation is happening either on the buyer side or on the seller side. And we have seen in some very few cases where one agent is working between the buyer and seller. So that means you are getting into a execution mode or negotiation mode. It gets attracted as a real estate activity. Second thing which they talked about is a fiduciary activity or a trustee or a secretarial capacity. Now, when we say fiduciary activity, we are talking about the second action plan where we appoint, example, a lawyer, because seller is not trusting the buyer and buyer is not trusting the lawyer. So what the seller is not trusting the buyer and buyer is not trusting the seller. So what technically a lawyer or a middle person does, he collects a check and he also collects the document. So that means he is a custodian of documents on both the side or collateral on both the sides. And when the execution is completed, he hands over the check to the seller and hands over the documents with execution to the buyer. Now they're acting as a trustee or under the fiduciary capacity. This also becomes part of the real estate business or a real estate activity. Now the last thing, which was actually came as a surprise to me also, because it was not at all being envisaged. What they're referring to, if you're arranging, advising, or consulting on financial resources, that means you're helping them to take a mortgage loan or arranging them to get financial system or financial resources aligned. That is also being brought into the real estate definition. So if you look at real estate, it talks 3. One is your negotiation and executing for an agreement or a contract. You're acting as a fiduciary, trustee, or secretarial capacity. I'll add up one more statement here. A lot of time we have seen where a real estate agent takes a property of third party, not of their own company or activity. They take a property of the third party and they manage the rental and all those arrangements. So that is also, you're acting as a trustee in between. So that also becomes part of a real estate activity. So any company, any organization, or anything which works on a real estate, we need to look at these checks and balances. One thing I will just specify here, normally we have seen, generally law talks about substance over form. So this is a normal statement we have looked at. But surprisingly, my reading of this law or this activity says, we need to look at the substance and form also. So that means if I have an activity in my trade license, I need to definitely look at those activities also, whether this is part of DNFBPs or not. Second, if it is not in the trade license, let's assume, and you are doing that activity, that means in the form, in the substance it is there, then also we need to go and register from a DNFBP's perspective. So we need to look at both substance and form, both has to be looked at from a DNFBP definition or from an AML perspective per se. Next comes an interesting point, which is on precious metals, precious stones, whichever we talk about. So in this case, dealers in precious metals and precious stones, in carrying out a single monetary transaction or several transactions that appear to be interrelated or equal to more than 55,000. Now, this is a very good catch here, what they're given. They said one is, if you are dealing in precious metal and precious stones, you are DNFBPs. Now, add up point is, if you are doing single transaction or there are multiple transactions which are interrelated. Now, how will you come to know that these are interrelated? So that's a catch here. Example is, there is a jeweler, he gets a transaction of, today I go there as a customer and buy a 5,000 dirhams value of gold or maybe a jewelry. And I come back, tomorrow again I go and buy 5,000. Or I have series of transaction I'm doing it with a jeweler or a precious metal trader. Now, how will he come to know that I have in total, that means interrelated transactions are there for 55,000 dirhams? How will someone know unless he start collating that data that, okay, Rajiv Hira. Now, how the Rajiv Hira? I need to collect a passport or Emirates ID or some kind of a linkage in my core system to identify how the transactions are happening. So technically speaking, I will say all precious metal and precious stone companies are getting covered by default. 55,000 is not even a value from their perspective. Normally they trade on a higher side. But looking at what they have added up, that means interrelated. Now, interrelated gave a very good definition. Even husband-wife goes and get two billing done, let's say for 25,000 each, still it is interrelated. So that's also is coming up. So how will you identify whether these are spouses who have taken the documents? There is a lot of intelligence they have left it for a customers to build it up. How you can build up those intelligence, you have to come up with some compliance document which says that these are checks and balances we are verifying, and those are enough. So these are this is again second process which comes as a DNFBPs from a precious metal and precious stone perspective. Next comes now this is again getting into very broad category. It talks lawyers, notaries, and independent legal professional and independent accountant. So this is where the independent accountant, which is very much related for our business and profession, also comes into play. When they're preparing, so these are all commas, these are not and or. Then they're preparing, conducting, or executing financial transaction for their customers in respect of following activities. So they have given the activities. Now, preparing means, is preparing of management accounts is an activity? Yes, maybe. Is conducting an activity is also an important from that perspective. But one thing which I will say, they talked about independent accountants. So employees, if you are working in the employee capacity, you are not an independent accountant because you are an employee of an organization. Your organization may be DNFBP, but from an employee who's working as an accounts person or in the finance section, cannot be classified as DNFBP. However, there are different rules or different, you can say, checkpoints which may come up from an employee perspective, because every employee has a responsibility from an AML perspective, which we'll talk on at a different stage. Now, what they talked about, one thing is important for their customers. So we are not talking about our own activity. Yes, we are not talking about our own activity. We're talking about if you do all these activity for their customer. Now, what all activities they refer to? First, they said purchase and sale of real estate. So any of the person who is involved in purchase and sale of real estate, it's not only a real estate agent or a real estate person. Even as an independent accountant perspective, also we help to execute the sale and purchase of transaction. We may be qualified as a part of a DNFBP. So that's where the catch comes into. What they are looking at, if you see, if you have seen so far, they're looking at the high value or the transactions which has a high scope of money laundering perspective. That means a cash utilization can happen, maybe on account of lesser value property being purchased and a higher value sold, or vice versa. So which side of the AML you are looking at is what it comes into. Next comes management of funds owned by customers. So that means you are having an investment management company, or you are having an authorized signatory activity in the bank account, and you are seeing what bank balances are coming in, what bank balances are going out. All those factors are becoming part of the activity which we are referring to. Management of bank accounts, saving account, or securities account. So again, we are talking about if I have authorized signatory activity, even for submitting the documents in the bank, then also any of the person who is being listed above, whether it's a lawyer, notarized, or other independent legal professionals. So they have kept it quite open. They have not, from a federal perspective, it's not only a tick box that only if you're a lawyer you have and you are doing this thing, you become a DNFBP, anyone. And this is where the framework getting quite extended, and there is a lot of, you can say, very thin line between person being not qualified as DNFBP and person being qualified as DNFBP. Then comes organizing contribution of the establishment, operation, or management of company. So we are either part of the managed. We have seen a lot of people, what they do, they give their names as a part of a manager of a company. If you are becoming a part of a manager, and even your organization, whomsoever you are managing it out, can be qualified as part of the activity. I'm again referring one more point. We are not talking about the person who are employees. We are talking about an independent professional who is giving his name under the company framework. We are not talking about a manager who is an employee, full-time employment contract with an organization. We are not talking to them because those people are already out of the DNFBP definition perspective. But yes, any legal entity, any professional body, any independent accounting body we are talking about, if they lend their name for running an organization, for managing their funds, becomes part of a DNFBPs from that perspective. Selling and buying commercial entities. Now here, merger and acquisition, kind of equivalent activity. A due diligence where you are part of the executing team, also not only looking at the documentation, not only valuation, you are getting into the place where you help the clients buy the organization or commercial entities or sell the commercial entities. Those people are also part of a DNFBPs. So any kind of a transaction happening for even change of shares of a company where any of the professionals is part of it getting space into the DNFBP. So this is where, if you see, the ambit is getting so bigger from a lawyer, notarized, and independent accountant perspective. And next comes a clear category from where we say about the corporate service provider trust upon performing then executing a transaction on behalf of customers in respect of following activities. Again, there are corporate service licenses which are being issued by various authorities. So if you are a CSP, corporate service provider, or a trustee, or you become a trustee for the funds or the organization, then also it comes as a part of a DNFBP definition. If you look at what we read in before section of lawyers, almost the similar points are coming from CSPs or a trust also. In this case, we are talking about a corporate service provider or a trustee is acting on behalf of their customers. That means the funds of the customer, you are taking a control either as a legal person or a legal representative, and you are managing the show from a customer's perspective or a company perspective. All those factors are becoming part of a CSP and brings up the umbrella here. Working as equipping another person to serve as a director or secretary. So either you, that is a CSP, we have seen a lot of organizations where corporate service provider give their lending from an ESR perspective. Also, if you link it out, economic substance regulation require that you need to have some full-time employees, directors and all. And they allow outsourcing also, which is perfectly fine. Now the outsourcing entities, which is the corporate service providers, are bringing up into the umbrella of AML, and they are also getting back into the traction or reporting side. So in this case, we are saying if it's an entity, they are providing the directors to work as a nominee director or acting directors in the company. They provide a secretarial work and they're executing the activity of a company. That also becomes a part of a DNFBP definition. So this is all coming up. If you see, what they are looking at from a regulation perspective, anyone who is helping the other entity to act without we being knowing who are behind the transaction or behind the companies, they want to bring those people on the umbrella of check. Next comes a lot of times what happens because of rental issues and other things, there are a lot of CSPs and a lot of institutions which lend their addresses. So what they say is, you use my office address, I'll give you the NOC to use my office address. A lot of friends do this for other companies. So that's also becoming part of a corporate service provider definition, because you are providing a registered address, work address, residence, correspondent address, or administrative address of a legal person or a legal arrangement. So any kind of a communication which is coming up, because the bigger issue we have seen here from a banking perspective, I talk about, when the communication does not reach the right person, there is a gap. So that's a gap which they're trying to look at it. Who is reading those communication, how those communications are going to the client. So if you are even letting out or giving an NOC for any other entity to use our office address, then also we are becoming part of a DNFBP definition. And it's an obligation which comes into other factors. Now comes up next from a CSP, again, CSP and trust, again, they added up that performing work or equipping another person to act as a trustee. So either you are working as a trustee or you are supporting that, okay, I'll arrange a trustee for you, don't worry. So that's also becoming part of the definition from a CSP or a trust perspective. So these are all nominee shares, trustees. That means we are giving arms and legs for people to act as a front end for the organization. So if any of these things are done, it's becoming part of that activity. Just to rephrase it out, if you see the connect between ESR, economic substance regulation, and DNFBP definition from a CSP and legal attorney, if I just add up both these things. In ESR, they said you should have a substance here. However, you can outsource. Since you outsource an activity to an organization, that outsourced company becomes part of a DNFBP. So they're bringing the umbrella in a bigger, wider way. Okay, we want you. If you don't have, then we want someone else to monitor you. So this becomes another part. Now, if you see from they have kept it open also. They have still not said that this is the only factor. Ministry can keep on adding up a definition. So just to give a perspective here, auditors, independent accountants also are becoming part of a DNFBP. I'm just giving a phrase, independent accountants who are not even auditors. And however, they have a responsibility for creating a management accounts are also getting attracted from a DNFBP perspective. I need to look at where we stand from that perspective. Now, there are a lot of circulars which have come in the month of Feb and March, and this is where the real uneasiness or real action started off. It started from circular 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Fifth circular also came. So if you see, these circulars are technically the same. 1 to 4 are the similar circulars, but what they have done is they have highlighted and they've given headers which are different. So I just gave an example of one of the circular. The one says about real estate broker and agent. 2 says about dealer of precious metal and stone. 3 says about accountant and auditors. 4th is for CSPs, company service providers and trustees. So that's where it is. And the 5th circular came up and stated about the date. It's 31st March 2021, not 3rd March. So maybe I'll correct it here and then only. So it's 31st March 2021. So logic of correcting it is we know what we are talking about. So 31st March is the date to complete some of the actions which are being defined here. Now, what are the actions? So there are broadly 4 actions which they talked about. I have seen whatever discussion so far is happening on action number 3. We are right now missing on action number 1, 2, and 4. But let's look at what is these actions they're talking from the circular perspective. What they said, appoint a compliance officer. Now, who is a compliance officer? What a compliance officer can do? Just give me a minute. Maybe Ramesh, if there any question on previous point, we can take it up because we are going to go into a different discussion. Is it okay? Ramesh, you're on mute.
Yeah. So there are questions which is posted on the chat box. We can take one by one.
Okay. Will you take up the question or should I read it? Both are okay, fine.
Yeah, and I'll read it for everyone's interest. So first question is from Krishan Kumar. Are LLC real estate companies covered in the applicability of AML or only the company in DZ?
Okay, the applicability of designated non-banking business professionals has nothing to do with whether you're on a free zone or a mainland. If you have an establishment or an entity in UAE, geographical UAE, no designated zone which are outside the scope of AML perspective are covered. Subject to what we talked about, they were doing that activity which is mentioned. And again, I'm re-emphasizing, we are not talking about only substance, we are talking about form and substance. That means look at the trade license, what activities we talked about, and look at what you do. That means check your incomes, check your activities or the management records, how these are being designed. So both are covered.
The next question is from Mr. Jahangir Hussain. The question is, real estate sales and brokerage include property management or leasing, or it's just sale and purchase of real estate? So does this include sales and brokerage? I mean, whether the property management services and leasing is covered under the real estate brokerage or not.
Perfect. Thanks. So as I said, real estate is covered, and we talked about anyone who is managing third party's property. That means not your own property management activity are covered in this. Whether you are managing the property, that means I give an example. You took a property which is owned by party X, and you look at the rentals, you collect the rentals, and you transfer the rental back to the owner. It's a third party management. Yes, it is covered under the definition of DNFBPs. It's not only sale purchase, management is also part of
it. The next question is similar, Mr. Brijesh Shah. Will companies earning from leasing of properties held in their own names, like investment for sale, be included in real estate?
So far, it's your own property. That means we're talking about a proprietary investment companies. Own has to be looked at from an own perspective. If you are managing a property of a director, it's not own property. But if the property is owned by the company and you're managing the proprietary investment, then yes, you are not part of DNFBPs. But if you are managing any third-party transactions, then you are included as part of DNFBP, and all the regulations which you talked about complies to. Let's look at, I just give a quick snapshot of what we are talking about. We are talking about managing the asset which does not belong to you, or helping someone to sell and purchase the asset for the third party. So all those things are getting covered. Again, look at whether your trade license, because I had some conversations where we have seen in the trade license, it says management of third party properties. However, in a substance, we talked about, they're not doing a third party management, they're only doing in-house. So still the DNFBP is getting applicable because your trade license talks about that.
Yeah.
Look at a substance and form. That means look at the activity and look at what is written in the trade license also. It's very important.
Rajiv, you can proceed. We can take more questions in the Q&A session.
Perfect. Thank you. So I just want to make sure that we are aligned with the DNFBP's alignment perspective. So I'll just pick up the 4 points which were talked about. That is, one is appointment of compliance officer. Now this is a foremost activity which is being looked at. Who is a compliance officer and whom we can appoint as a compliance officer? So there is one is they have specified that compliance officer should have an adequate knowledge and experience. So that's a word they're using from an AML CFT perspective. Now it's a quite a tricky statement. They're not given which qualification, what kind of experience we're talking about. Yes, we can use some benefit of doubt in this case. However, when we make a compliance officer, we need to be very clear, because regulators are going to have a conversation or any kind of a discussion or communication with a compliance officer, and he should be independent. Now the point comes as an independent, we keep talking from audit perspective also independent. We had some conversations where people are saying, I have a sales department people and I want to pick up any sales department person and make him a compliance officer. My answer was, it may not be appropriate, because how can we expect a compliance officer to verify the transaction which he or she has done himself or herself? So the independence has to be there. It is very clearly being mentioned as part of a compliance officer appointment. We need to know, we need to identify the compliance officer and see what kind of a diligence can be done. Now, once we have a compliance officer, the second thing comes is to perform the due diligence measures. Now, we're not saying just go ahead and start looking at what customers we can, what kinds of customers we can bring and what not. They're talking about create a KYC policy or an AML policy. Now, when we talk about an AML policy, we need to look at the framework which the authorities have given against the documents which we refer to, 3 documents, 10 and 20. Now, in those documents, we need to pick up specific guidance notes are being issued by the authorities, which are very handy. So there are 5 guidance notes which are issued. One is a designated non-banking business professional, a generic guidance note. One is for auditor and accountants. The third one is for a real estate. Fourth one is for a precious metal stone traders. And last one is for a corporate service provider. So there are very specific guidance note issued in 2019. These are very handy documents. You need to look at those documents very carefully, which says the do's and don'ts from a AML perspective. Now, when we are creating a KYC policy document, we need to see broadly three factors. One is identify, verify, and monitor. Now, what are we talking about identify? Identify is looking at one, whenever we are opening a new relationship or whenever we are getting into a new relationship with a client, we need to identify who are people behind that. We are getting into the big backstory of UBO, ultimate beneficial owners. Now, here, there is one more catch which comes into, although we need to do a KYC based on the UBO, but the law is not restricting ourselves to 25%. So at a first stage, we need to identify the warm bodies. When I say warm bodies, I'm talking about a human being, which are behind the company. Whether he or she is holding 1%, 2%, that's irrespective. We need to find the warm bodies. I'm excluding one category of companies here, which are listed companies, listed with a regulated stock exchange, not any kind of a listed company. And the regulated stock exchange is also defined by FATF, which is giving the list that these are the stock exchange which we qualify as regulated. Why they are excluding those? Because there are a lot of checks and balances those regulatory authorities or stock exchange authorities are taking care of. Hence, they are saying if you are onboarding a relationship, which is a listed company, you can ignore doing a broad check, but definitely look at who are the people, who are the decision makers. So there is a basic KYC definitely required. You may not require to do the UBO activities, is what we are referring to. Now, first, as I talked about, identify the warm body behind the company. Look at what's happening or what kind of a relationship we are entering into. Next comes verify. Now, in the verification process, there is a lot of checks and balances required. We need to verify those warm bodies or the people we have identified behind the company, that they don't have any negative world check record. Now, what is negative world check record? There are various lists or various checklists which are available, which is being published by FATF and UN sanction authorities and various authorities which are there. Pramod is going to talk much detail on those lists and how these lists are evaluated. So we need to look at whether any of the entity or an individual I am onboarding, are they being blacklisted or they have any alerts in the global phenomena. Example, I'm onboarding a client and suddenly I find that the manager or the shareholder has some tax evasion or some terrorist funding kind of a red alert against that client. What I need to do? I need to do some further task also. But first I need to identify. How will I identify? I cannot do a control F, to be honest, because a lot of AML checks are going with a fuzzy logic. Example, my name, I write my name as RAJIV. But if in the authorities, or if I give you my identification document using RAJEEV, that means instead of I, I'm using EE. As a vowel, they both sound same, but control F will not search this thing. So how will we identify those people, and how will we not do something that we miss those identities? So I'm talking about corporate identity. That means any kind of a layering of people which are there. I'm talking about individual identity. What kind of individual people are there? So that's where the KYC policy comes into play. And the last comes is a monitor. Now, monitoring is looking at what kind of a transactions they are doing. So this is very important from a gold business perspective and real estate perspective. What kind of a funds they are bringing in to do the transaction? What kind of a money is coming in cash or from a third party sources? So these are some of the red alerts which we keep talking about, and I'm going to take up those elements at a later stage also. So when we are talking about this document, we're talking about one AML KYC policy, whatever name we call about, which should cover broadly three factors: how we identify, how we verify, and how we monitor. It's simple as that, but I can tell you normal are the easiest document I've seen, which definitely translate to 30, 40 pages, because you need to ensure that your employees are also aware by reading those documents. Your execution team, if you have any outsourcing employee, he's also or she's also aware about what kind of a policies need to be checked, what kind of a checks and balances need to be adopted from a KYC policy perspective. So that comes into the second layer. Third layer is where the target date is coming up, 31st March. We need to register ourselves. So what the framework is saying, report suspicious transaction in the GoML system. So before even reporting, we need to first register. So 31st March is the date for registering the GoML system. Now, there are various benefits authorities are gaining by forcing people or by pushing people from a DNFBP perspective to register to GoML. Because right now, none of the authorities in UAE or none of the regulatory system in UAE knows how many DNFBPs are there. So first, to start implementing the regulation, any authority want to know the finite population. If I know the member base, I can do some action. But if I don't know the member base, how the actions can be done? So GoML is helping authorities to get a finite list of people who are part of DNFBPs. And definitely authorities are going to look at also people who miss and who are part of DNFBP. How they are going to do, we will see in a very, very short span, because there are going to be checks and balances based on trade license. We have seen a lot of authorities have sent individual mails also to the company telling them, please register for GoAML. We have not seen your registration process so far. So that's a place where if you find any kind of a suspicious transaction or a suspicious behavior or any kind of a customer or whether he's onboarded or you are going to onboard, and you identify him to be under the blacklist or under the watch list, whatever name, various names are there, the reporting has to go immediately. Now, the reporting has a lot of parameters. I'll just give us very specific thing. Maybe we require a 1 or 2 day session to talk how the suspicious transactions need to be looked at and how it can be translated. So there is a lot of homework, a lot of actions which are done. So what they're expecting, if you identify anyone who is part of the watch list, please report us. If you are suspicious of any transaction, you're not certain, you're only suspicious. The word is used as suspicion. You're not saying that unless you are certain, you don't report us. No, you are suspicious, you have to report the transaction. If you are certain, anyway, you have to report the transaction. But the system is same, GoML system, and the reporting is done. Once the reporting is done, there are a lot of criteria which they are using. One very specific thing which I say here is, whenever any DNFBP reports any suspicious transaction, you are not supposed to discuss that transaction with your client, whether he is actually a client or a potential client, on what basis you identify the suspicion, because that is considered as a tip-off, and authorities are very stringent on a tip-off slippage, because what they believe, if you tip off a client, there is a potential that he or she may unwrap the transaction in a different way, and we will not be able to get the evidences in the right order, which could have been found. So be careful and let's not tip off a client from any sense perspective. And the last thing comes, which is registration in the automatic reporting system for sanction list. So what the regulatory authority, which is Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU, being part of central bank and overall part of the Ministry of Economy, they have created a mailing list. You can register yourself, and whenever there is an addition or deletion in the list which is happening, you will get an alert. Now, when you get an alert, there are very small time or a very fraction of time which is given for 2 actions need to be done. One is report, and 2, freeze the account, transaction or activity which you are doing. When they say freeze, means you cannot take any positive steps or negative steps in those accounts. So these are again the 4 pointers if I talking from an AML perspective. So this is the document which is referring to 4 action plans: appointment of compliance officer, performing due diligence, reporting suspicious transaction. This is where GoML reporting comes into play, and register for the sanction system also. So a lot of people have done GoML registration. Make sure you do a sanction check also. On a positivity of time, I will not be taking the registration process. However, I'm giving a YouTube link, which is done by one of my colleague. So you can look at this YouTube. I'll post this YouTube in the chat window also in some time. This talks exactly how the registration process has to be done. Even Ministry of Economy also has released a lot of communication on that. So you can look at the steps to be followed, because you need a Google authenticator. So there is a lot of checks and balances which are part of it. Perfect. Now, these are the 4 pillars I normally say from an AML perspective, which need to be looked at from a compliance program perspective. One is having an internal policy, procedure and control, conducting a training, having an independent review, and employment of compliance officer. This is never stopping activity. So once you make a policy and procedure and control, it does not mean it is stagnant, because one, from Ministry of Economy and from a AML perspective, we'll keep getting the guidance notes, and hence we need to improvise whatever things are coming up. We need to ensure that our staff is adequately trained, because this is very critical point, which normally we have seen from an investigation or from a whenever inspection happens from a AML perspective. So far, we have seen the banking and other institutions where it is applicable so far. So they look at how many people have attended the training, what was the content of training. So make sure if you're doing it, create an audit trail, keep it with you. When I say keep an audit trail, send an invite through email, circulate the presentation through email, and make sure you have an attendance also, which is available. If you want to do a recorded one, perfectly fine, which is also beneficial, but make sure you have. Independent review comes to the third party review. So they are generally, regulators expect you have a third party, that means an independent auditor or an independent compliance review officer who comes and reviews the whole compliance framework. So these are 4 broad pillars which are looked at. I'll just give you a broad checkpoints, what should be there as a policy and procedure and what controls are there, because this is something which I feel a lot of people have not started for. One is senior management approval is a mandatory thing. We cannot have this document done by any of the staff member. When I say senior management, we're talking about a board or if board is not available in the country, then whoever is a senior manager or our owners which are there. So overview of law and regulation should be part of it. So you need to give some framework. As I said, guidance notes are a good document. You can pick a lot of content from there. A definition of what constitutes suspicious activity and how to manage it. Why this is a specific to be used, because every organization and every entity has a different type of role, type of activity, and type of procedures. So how will you identify suspicious transaction? One, as I said, doing a KYC you identify. 2, which can be a behavior, the kind of questions which a client is asking, can also be a part of a suspicious activity. So there is some checklist, some kind of a bullet point should be available, so that staff or whoever is dealing with the client can say, yes, I found something different. Let me talk to the compliance officer and see whether I should raise this document from a compliance officer perspective, and compliance officer can take that element to the regulator from a suspicious transactions. Procedure for reporting suspicious activity. So generally we recommend we should have a 2-step approach. One, internal suspicious account reporting, and external. When I say internal, maybe the whoever's employee found that exception, they can share that document or exception to the compliance officer, and that compliance officer, after doing a basic due diligence, can report to the external reporter, regulatory authority, rather than keeping all the tap open. So my recommendation is always look at internal and external suspicious account reporting. We need to keep one thing in very specifically clear. Even internal SARs have to be documented, and audit trail need to be met. If compliance officer is thinking that I will not report outside, he should have a very justified reason and should be documented, so that tomorrow, if a regulator comes or even the employee complains that I have raised a SAR which was not being heard for, the document trail is going to be asked by the regulator from a DNFBP perspective. So we need to have an audit trail which should be there with a compliance officer or a money laundering reporting officer, whatever name we call about, on this activity. Next comes procedure for responding to regulatory or law enforcement requests. So if there is the email which we are given as an administrator and MLRO, we should have a very clear eye on those email boxes and make sure nothing goes to the junk, and because we don't get too much time in reporting back to the law enforcement authority. So that's where it comes into. And the last point, which we talked about, an independent review or a quality assurance program, which can be a peer review assurance program, where one organization can go to the another one to look at how the compliance framework or compliance program is working. Now, broad from a CDD perspective, we talked about 3. I can just give you a quick bullet points which are there. One is identification, we talked about, so I'm not going to repeat on that. Next is a development of profile. Now, when we say profile, we are not talking about only the passport document. We are talking about what is the background of a client, what kind of a wealth he possesses, which we know. We don't need to ask every information as a backup document. We need to have some information which is collected from a client perspective. And then assessment and risk rating. So when we say every client, when we are onboarding a client, there are risk factors which are there. I'm not talking that in this discussion, but broadly I can say what kind of a product they are buying from us or we are serving to them. Second comes which nationality or which kind of a country he comes from, because there is a country level risk which is there. And the third comes, so product, country risk, and overall a PEP risk also is a high risk which comes into. If there is someone who is a politically exposed person, a politically exposed person, there is a vast definition, or there's a broader definition which comes from a politically exposed person. We are not talking about person who are being selected or elected. We are talking about some of the bureaucratic positions also, where a PEP benefit can be taken or may be taken. So these are high risk profiles, and we need to look at how we do a risk grading. One suggestion here: whenever we do a risk grading, we need to assess our total client base, and we should look at a model which is a bell curve. We should not have all the clients sitting in the low risk or all the clients sitting in the high risk. We should have a certain percentage which qualifies that this is a percentage of high risk clients, this is a percentage of low risk clients. However, we cannot ignore some of the factors, as I said, country and PEP risk. We cannot ignore it. So that's need to be done. And once the risk is being identified, the acceptance of risk has to be there from the top management. So that means if I say someone has a high risk, it's not only the compliance officer prerogative, it goes to the top management also, or a senior management also. And there are profiles which need to be assessed by the senior management for assigning or acceptance. Next comes a monitoring. If it's a high risk client, I'm going to monitor it at a much more smaller interval than for a low risk client. So example, if I talk about, if let's say I'm setting up a company for someone and the second client is coming to me for a VAT advisory or a basic business advisory, let me use that terminology. So company setup is definitely a high risk because I'm creating a new entity for an organization. Whereas my consulting can be a low risk. I'm not saying generally all consulting are low risk, but I'm just giving a broad definition. So consulting can be a low risk, but a company formation is definitely high risk. Now within company formation, if it's coming as a free zone company with office, with employees, I will still call it as a low risk. Whereas if it's an offshore company without employee and having only monetary transactions, then it can be high risk. So that's how we define the risk categorization of each client or each profile also. So these are broad 7 elements which are being used, and it's applicable to any industry. There is no exception what we talk about. Now, what is a call for action? We say one is create profiling. Look at each client and classify into the high risk, medium risk, low risk, or rating of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever definition we look at. Design transaction monitoring system to identify trends. If we are, especially in the real estate or in the gold business, is there a trend we are finding that every time you get a cash and money goes out in the check or a legitimate transaction perspective? Client visit reports. AML gives quite a weightage when we meet a client face to face. So are we meeting client face to face, or only email business, or only call business is happening? When you are meeting a client face to face, AML gives a lot of assurance that yes, you know more about the client than only having a communication through email business. And then AML risk forum to monitor and risk assessment. So you did everything what you have done, but is there a top management having a review or view of what's happening in the whole structure? So all these things becomes part of the discussion. Now, this is the automated reporting system of sanction list. I'll recommend everyone who has done a GoML registration, do subscribe to the list also. And Pramod is going to talk more on what is a sanction list and how some of the tools which are available can help us to do some kind of a checks and verify how the things are moving in. So that's it, Ramesh, from my slides perspective. I'll stop here. And
thank you so much, CA Raji, for your very insightful presentation. It's always pleasure to hear you. Let's hear our second speaker, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Okay. So before that, let me read his profile. Mr. Pramod is founder of startup IntelliWings, having a versatile IT background with knowledge, expertise, and experience in banking products. Pramod's objective is to bring more value in BFSI, compliance, and e-commerce space by bridging the gaps and infusing innovation in the product and solutions. It is not just the uses of new technology or innovation or idea which gives him satisfaction. A robust approach which is looked at from various permutation possible and solution to make better customer journey in a true sense. Mr. Pramod has worked as senior IT solution architect, manager with IT firm Infosys Wipro for over 12 plus years, provided IT solution to leading banks, Bank of America, Citi, Morgan Stanley, ABN AMRO. Working closely on the compliance products, Pramod sensed the need of reimagining the AML CFT solutions to make them more comprehensive and accurate. An avid tech speaker and blogger on digital modernization, AI, ML, digital security, computing. He is BTech in computers from Birla College, TITS Bhiwani. I now welcome Mr. Pramod Sharma for the presentation. The floor is all yours, Mr. Pramod.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. Just to make sure the energy doesn't go below the level which is needed for the session. Happy Holi to all of you, and thank you so much, Nihar sir, to set the stage in the right context, given the high level overview of what is needed on AML, and then thanks to Rajiv to go deeper, much deeper on what is needed exactly for DNFBPs. I think most of the people here belong to that zone, so they would know exactly what is needed. So I would not dig into the problem because that is already discussed much in detail. I'll speak out the solution because you should have something in your head as to how you can relate the solution to the problem. So you get something out of this session when you go. So I'll share my screen. So let me know once it is visible. Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so I'll keep it short because the attention span may go down because we have been already a lot of minutes we have already spent. So I'll be directly on the point of solution. So we are a company called Intelivings, as the introduction is already given, so I'll not repeat it. But we are already in the space of AML, and we are trying to help the SMEs, DNFBPs, and also the banks to actually simplify the complicated stuff which goes behind the scene for AML. So this is our solution. I'll just give high level overview, then I'll try to relate the problem to the solution. So this is what we do. So this is our solution on AML. We have a customizable rule engine, then watch list filtering, which is the sanction part, which Rajiv was talking about, then suspicious activity monitoring, auto generation of all reports which are needed by the regulators, and integrated adverse and PEP media check, which Rajiv was talking about, and then a case management solution for compliance officer who is you are appointing for analyzing the things. So the next thing is the important part, which would give you some sense of what solution could be like. So the customer profiles and transactions which are coming from your company, actually they are onboarded in some AML system, and the AML system has to screen the transactions against the AML rules which are set by your company, seeing the trend. So if you are precious stone, you would have different rules. If you are legal or a trustee, you may have different rules. And then the customer screening, which is pretty standard, but it has to be very exhaustive because this is a bigger check than the transaction monitoring check. So here you would screen the customer profiles against global sanction list like UN to start with, then OFAC of US, HMT, World Check, and also you would have the PEP check and the adverse media check, just to make sure that the person who you are onboarding or the customers of the customer who you are onboarding are the right ones to be part of the system or the transaction. Then the alerts are generated from the transaction screening and the customer screening, and they are fed into the machine learning models, which actually not every software uses, but this is preferred that machine learning knows what is the trend of alerts and what are the good alerts. And eventually the machine learning models should send the good alerts to the case management solution, where the compliance officers or the analysts or the principal officers. In some firm, the bigger firms, you'll find principal officers also. So they look at the alerts and cases very holistically, very comprehensively. They have everything under one umbrella to make a judicious call on what should be done with the alerts and cases. And eventually the reports are sent to the regulators. So that is what solution looks like for AML. And I'll uh, I'll stick to this sanction screening part as we go forward, because transaction monitoring would need another session to go through the whole workflow. So I'll talk about the sanction screening part. So here, what you have to do when you are onboarding a customer or customer of your customer, so you have to make sure that the person doesn't have any PEP relation, which is the politically exposed person check, which is making sure that he is not related to any high ranking officer or influential person. So the exposed word is a little negative, but it is actually, it means that any person having influence is a PEP. And it is not negative thing. It is just to make sure that you are aware of all the PEP checks before onboarding a person. And of course, you have to screen all the global sanction list, United Nations, OFAC, HMT, DFED, just to make sure the customer who is getting onboarded is not related to any sanction profiles, or the company also. It could be person or a company who is getting onboarded in the system. So that has to be screened for all sanctions check. And then you can have the custom list also. For example, there are a few new sanctions coming in UAE. So you may want to have this newly sanctioned companies or persons being part of your custom list, so that those are screened and you get alerts for those custom lists. And you can have the white label list also. So this is what is needed for a AI powered solution. So there are companies like Vultcheck and Dow Jones. They make it their own proprietary database by hiring agents throughout the world. But this is what we have done. I'll just give some idea on how we are making adverse and PEP database. So we screen the global news and get the profiles having adverse news or related to terrorism or drug trafficking or similar. Or also we do the PEP check. So for making the PEP related database, what we do is we scrape the whole government's websites and the ministry websites, which are public data. We are not scraping something which is private. Whatever is publicly available is being scraped to get the data and make a PEP database. And also the wiki sources, which are suggestive, is part of the database. So this is how you would get a database against which you can scrub the customer profiles and get an alert. So I'll quickly jump to this demo part to save the time and give you some hint on what can happen behind the scenes to generate alert for during the customer onboarding process. So this is the screen where some customers are already onboarded. It could be company or a person. I'm just taking you through a flow of a customer. So this is a customer having all the details here, and there is identification set, also customer address set. All the fields are already filled for this customer. I'm making a change so that this profile gets up for screening. So any new customer who is getting onboarded, or if there is any change in the customer profile, so in both cases, the screening is mandatory. Okay, so since there is a change, now the system should pick up this profile for making a check whether there is a hit now or not. So I'll just go through these lists. So our system make sure that we are scrubbing the customer profile against the global sanction list, as well as the PEP and adverse media, which is our own proprietary database, and also the custom list which you can create in the system. So these list are coming to the point which Rajiv was highlighting. You can do this by downloading the whole data in your Excel, but that is not what a regulator would want, because how would you handle the fuzzy logic? How would you handle the refresh, which are happening almost every day in the source? So those things are very, very complicated for you to handle. So you need to have a very robust system in place to ensure that you are adhering to the compliance in totality and with the accuracy needed. So here, what the system does is it pulls the data from all these global sanction lists every night and makes our database of the system updated. And the new profile which is waiting to be scanned, or if there is any profile which has changed, would now be scrubbed against this latest refreshed database. So I've chosen everything by default. So now comes the important part on how you want to scrub. Again, these parameters you can't do with the XLS on fuzzy logic, phonetics, and translation. So you need to make sure when you're scrubbing the customer profile against these sanctioned databases, there is a fuzzy logic in place, which Rajiv also spoke about, but there is also need of phonetics. Pramod and Pramod, if it sounds similar, by the definition of FATF guidelines, this is needed to be caught because there is a relation and something seems suspicious. So also there is a need of translation. For example, some names may be in different language in these sources. So you need to ensure that they are translated in English or the language of your local region and then searched. So these and also the parameters or of whether they have to be searched on first name, middle name, last name, identifier, jurisdiction, date of birth. So those are also to be taken care of. So there could be basic search or advanced search to refine the search further. So here I'm just going with the basic search. So it has found out one alert in the profile which was updated. Now comes the case management part. So here, as I said, we are not talking about TM, which is the transaction monitoring, just the sanctions part. This is the time we have, so I'll just go through sanctions. So this is the new alert which is there in the system now. So as analyst, so analyst is generally the typical first level of looking at why the alert has come. So he would come here and he would look at the alert, see where all it had the head. So it shows that European Union had head for this name. So he would go through the detail of it, that it shows that, okay, this is the customer detail. And this is the detail of the hit from the blacklisted profile or the watch list. It is term watch list also is used as a term for blacklist. So it came from European Union, and this is the detail of the list. And what exactly match with the score, you should have the whole idea. And also you can look at the search setting when the scrubbing of the profile was done. So your system, whatever AML system you go with, should have at least this capability that you should know the total match score, and you have the detail of comparison of the customer with the hits which are there in the system now. So as an analyst, you would choose the entries which you think are the reason for you to create a case for it. So here you would go and create a case for it, or you can simply dismiss. In most of the cases, you'll simply dismiss, or some suspicious related transaction, some STR, which is suspicious transaction report related fields also you can fill, but I'll skip that section for now. But here comes the interesting part where you would fill the match probability, saying, okay, as analyst, I think because of this first name or alias match, I think this should be created as a case. And this is what your selection was from the blacklisted profile list, that these are the good hits because of which the case is getting created, which you chose from the overall entry list. And then you would create a case for it. Then comes the next level, which is the compliance officer. So as Rajiv said, someone has to independently look at what is happening in the system. So you can hire or whatever is possible for you to have the compliance officer. He would look at the case which is created, and he would simply reject it or reassign to someone else, some analyst, or he can simply confirm it with his comments. And he would also choose the match probability, and there would be choice of source entities. He can also go to the match detail and see the details of hits very comprehensively and choose his list of hits, which is his discretion on why the case should be confirmed, and then support the attaching documents and he can confirm. So this is the rare case where you would find a very suspicious activity happening with the customer, and you would want that to be confirmed. Most of the time, it would be rejection of alert. You don't have to do it deliberately because you have to follow the law and guideline very properly. But that is the most practical number that most of the time you would go for rejection after you have figured out everything is fine. But if it is confirmed, then you would need an end-to-end report that okay, who was the customer, and what were his identity, detail of matches in the different sanction list, and what was the choice of analyst and the compliance officer. This end-to-end report you can simply download and keep it for your record, so that even if when the system is not available, you have something with you to ensure that you can show it to the regulators. So this is just high level workflow, but I don't want to take a lot of time. Rajiv, over to you, Ramesh.
Yeah. Thank you, Pramod. Thank you so much.
Pramod, I have a question. Now, this system will be linked to our system, or it will be an independent system altogether, and then we have to feed the data in your system, and it will give the desired result.
Yeah, so for SMEs, we have tried to make it simpler. So it would be a software as a service available over cloud, and it is in the Dubai region, for example, if it is UAE region rather. So it is protected in the overall region of cloud in the UAE, and you have to access it as a simple website and upload the profiles or the I'm not talking about transaction, just the profiles you would upload through the system, and these would be available for the screening.
So that means, let us say if we are using SAP, so it will not be linked to our SAP system.
Yeah, so it is very much possible to link with SAPs and all, but that is a bigger onboarding task. So you will have to have a deeper integration with your system to ensure that we talk seamlessly. But I'm talking about the easier integration where you just want to use it for AML purpose. So you can simply open as a website, software as a service, and then upload the things which are needed.
And normally we have to take license for using at any point of time, or we can, it is per use basis. What kind of, how does it work?
So it is a license thing. So there is a software license and there is a user license also, but we give some user license free. There is a costing plan for this setup.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the floor is.
Ramesh, before
the floor
start,
is.
I'll just want to clarify
Please.
from Pramod. Pramod, first point, see, UAE has issued this sanction list with this that UAE, we need to subscribe for that listing, and we are getting on our emails. There's a very strict point which they are used here. Upon a new update to the relevant sanction list, we have to, as a DNFBP, screen customer database without delay when the new names are listed. This then inform the supervisory authority if there is any match. So first point is how fast the UN list which is getting updated in your system. How can we make sure that what is updated in central bank is already updated with Intel Wings also, or any kind of a software system we are talking about?
Yeah, so it is, of course, you can't do it manually with those Excel integration and all, because that is not at all possible to have the latest update. But what we do is we look at the source every night. Our parsers, almost real-time check is there, just to make sure that even if there is a differential change in one person name, that is getting reflected in our system. So that is a mandate, and that has to be done, and that is what we are doing today.
Perfect. So just add up for everyone else, like what happens here. One, I have a client which I'm going to onboard, which is fine. But I may have clients which are already onboarded. So may have 1,000 clients which are onboarded, and I'm doing some kind of activity with them as a DNFBP, either providing consulting, or they are going to be my company formation renewals which are coming up. So when this list is received, we are not only expected to make sure that what is going to happen for future clients, we need to scrub it for the past database also. Now, how we can do unless we have that database already available? So as Chansab said, do we have to type that data? Yes. The system I think Pramod is talking about is more SME driven system, but there are systems which Pramod is helping on the banking side also. those integrate with the customer profiling system. So there are various category of system. What I think Pramod is showing right now is more a SME, or you can say a small task activity, because this costing is dollars. That goes in the $1,000. So there is a very good difference on how the pricing comes into play.
Exactly.
Secondly, Pramod, tax authority, sorry, not tax authority. From an AML perspective, they are expecting us to create an audit trail. Now, this is a very vague thing which comes into a discussion. Like, okay, I got the client, I have scrubbed in. How should I create an audit trail and keep it with myself? So the report which you're showing, if you can show it again, is there a date time stamp which comes into part of it, or how it is there?
Yeah, so it shows end-to-end report with dates timestamp. So this is like very handy even if the system is not there. So exactly on the date timestamp. So report generation date timestamp. You can see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm in my own world. Just a second. Do you see it?
Yeah. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So it comes with date timestamp. You can see it exactly when you created this report. Okay. So it is showing in my local time. So that's why you can see 9205. I'm right now in India. So I just created few minutes before, in fact, within 1 minute. And it shows the customer detail with the customer number, which you might be keeping in the system. This is important so that you can relate well, because the names can be collision based. So better to have a customer number tracking. So that is what the system would use for identity. And it would have some listing with the some identity to start with passport detail, so that you can recognize, and also there would be detail of matches, which are overall list of matches with the global sanction databases, and then analyst choices and the compliance officer choices.
Technically, it's giving me a full audit trail of how it is to be kept. So correct. Comment to everyone from our perspective, whether you take the system or look at any other system or look at Excel working also, make sure exchange of information happen in such a way that you can create an audit trail. If nothing, then at least email. So a compliance officer can email the results to the sales officer or whoever is a related party, so that tomorrow if a regulator comes and wants to see an audit trail, email can be shown. Otherwise, it's very difficult to prove that you have done a control F or a control search. So that's one more point. Over to you, Ramesh, for other things. I thought these are some pointers.
No, thank you so much, Rajiv. No, I mean, I was about to open the Q&A for all the guests. So anyone has any query, you can please come online and you can ask your question directly with
Ramesh,
or Mr.
if I remember correctly, Ramesh, we had attended one session in Dubai where you were also there, and if I remember, there was some company called Check or some they had the similar kind of system, right? What was the name? Can you recall?
See, there right now, WorldCheck is there. LexisNexis is getting used from UAE perspective. There are multiple systems. I will say globally, if we talk about, there are hundreds of systems which are available on this site.
Yes. So what we attended was Bureau Vanzek. It's a Moody's company, but that is catering to, as Rajiv said, large entities, where the fees is exorbitantly very high.
But we also found that, there are certain agencies available in Dubai who do on if your query is for 5 clients, they will do it for 5 clients.
So that is software as a service provider, which Pramod also has mentioned that he provides the similar kind of services.
Mm-hmm. So here, Chansab, just to specify, those are technically doing a compliance officer pseudo role. Let's say example, I just the professional sitting here also can also take this kind of a software and create their ecosystem of compliance. So once, let's say, if client sends a passport copies of, let's say, 5 people, they will do a due diligence and send a report back. We found something or we don't find something. So similar kind of fashion. But yes, you are right. In this case, also an audit trail is getting generated, and you have a third party who is doing a separate assessment.
And Mr. Pramod, when you mentioned, or in fact, Rajiv mentioned that the customers of customers,
correct,
how to get that information?
So those are transaction based. So when we are creating a profile, at that time, example, let's say if I'm a gold trader, I'm buying gold from a company in Africa, fine. But I need to understand from where that Africa company is buying the gold from. I'm not going to do KYC much on that, but I'm going to ask the questions like, are you buying from the mines? Is it a refined gold or a scrap gold? Because scrap gold, if I buy, it's a high risk, more high risk. Gold is anyway a high risk.
But how do I verify what the party tells me?
Depends on if you have a good volume, clients push up. I need to have a mines document to establish that you're buying from the mines.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Rajiv. I have an announcement basically. I'd like to welcome the founding chairman of Dubai chapter, CA Mahendra Saabji Asher. He's in the audience today, as well as Ali Abbas Mirza Saab. So both of them, we're lucky to have both of them today. Asar Saab, if you can come online and address us, that would be a blessing for all of us.
You are on mute, sir. You are on mute.
Sir, you are on mute. You need to unmute yourself first.
Sorry, I thought I've done it, but actually, let me tell you, I'm a little bit handicapped in the sense that I don't attend office regularly. I go once in a while, but my partner Ratnakar Shetty is more active so far as office work is concerned. And then I must tell you to regret that I had a fall, so my right hand injury was there, multiple fractures. So I'm confined to my residence till next month, and maybe in April I'll be again full stream. So until then, I'm taking a sabbatical. Put it this way: I attend the program, I try to understand because I'm a learner. And when you mention about Abbas Ali Mirza's name, I consider him also to be my guru because we worked together in Chamber of Commerce and other committees. Long time, 1985, we started working together. So I don't find Abbas is here, but anyway, I have not seen the full screen, so I would like to see him. But I think
Abbasji, you are here.
exercise is very necessary. And then yes, Rajiv is spending good time, so Pramod also, and then you too, both the Pramods. So thank you very much, and I respect your all the statements and how much of work increase, and is there any scope for the auditors to increase the fees? This is the way, because your resources are employing so much, and then the client is not going to understand that what you are doing to comply with this requirement. So there should be some way of at least increasing the fees also, because your input goes tremendous high, and then output still remains the same, that the client will not increase the fee. On the contrary, will ask you to reduce the fees in the present time. Anyway, so these are the few comments, observation I made, and thank you very much for initiating this for me.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
and honestly speaking, as you said rightly, the cost of compliance is becoming higher and higher. There's no second thought. Every client we onboard, we need to think for maybe the justified fees, and the cost is becoming higher. So we have seen that in the financial industry. So coming from there, we have seen where the banks have said that we will not onboard a client unless he has a threshold of this value. So why the threshold is coming? Because cost of compliance is becoming higher. And so appreciate that's becoming a new normal, which we say from a UAE perspective.
Thank you so much, sir. Mahendra sir. Ali Abbas sir, would you like to come online and say a few words?
I don't think so. He is here. I sent him a private message. He did not reply.
Okay, no, he actually messaged me that he has some commitment. So, but next time we will invite him. Any other member who has any question, you can kindly ask with CA Rajiv Veera or Mr. Pramod Sharma. I've seen many questions which has been replied by Hani Mehtani ma'am. Thank you so much for assisting Rajiv in this field. And I'm sure you may have some query you can ask directly from Rajiv. You are on mute, Ms. Hani.
Sure. here we are to help our members, RAC members, RAC chapter members. So we are just supporting them how much we can support them in submitting GoML registration because the deadline is near.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ms. Sunny. So Rajiv, I'll do one thing since we have some time. I'll read few questions which Hani has left for you. So I'll go last first. What is the definition of trust in the AML? That question comes from Ekta Kothari.
Ekta, if you appoint anyone to trust your assets, or when we say trust your assets, that means you are acting as a front-end person for taking care of the assets. Either it's in the real sense, that means you have nominated them officially by giving a power of attorney or some kind of a documentation which allows that trustee to do a transaction, complete a transaction on your behalf. That's a first definition which comes into trust. Second is you give your rights. Let's say example, you told banker, you went to the bank with the person and says that for all my investment related requests will come from Mr. X. That's also a trust, because in this case, Mr. X is acting for your wealth or your assets and acting on behalf of you. So that's also becoming a part of a trust activity. So it's a very vast definition. Trust is something where we don't only look at the legal structure, where we look at the form also. So both have to be looked at. Hope I answered it. If you have any leading points, we can discuss live also.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'll read the next question. Please advise the record retention period.
Record retention period goes as from an AML perspective, more than 10 years, definitely. However, there are a lot of places where it is silent. From a regulator perspective, we'll see how the guidance note comes into. But yes, definitely 10 years is other regulations also help us to look at it. Ramesh, I'll pick up one question which Cosmi has asked for. It's a very relevant question which is coming for others also. There is a query which I would be grateful if you can discuss. So let me go to the question. It mentioned that in the law, the real estate agent and broker are required to register. However, our real estate master developer who also help their customer in exchange of brokerage will also need to be registered. Now here the point comes into, as we talked about, form and substance. So in this case, if let's say real estate broker is even arranging for a mortgage, is even helping other, normally what we have seen, the companies thrive out a small department. Let's say I have a brokerage company or a brokerage cost center, which is only created to help the internal business to be sold. But suddenly they make it a profit center and they said, let's not only do our business, let's onboard the other clients also and help them do the brokerage activity. So it become a profit center kind of activity. Yes, you get covered into this because you are doing a DNFBP activity. You are part and parcel of this license. So look at what kind of incomes which are coming in from a real estate master developer perspective also. If you are earning a brokerage income, which tantamounts to anything of the third party, you are part of it.
Yeah. Rajiv, the next question is from Ramam Nishtala. Can you please touch base on the penalty for not registering or if a company misses the deadline?
Penalty goes up to 5 million. So that's the most scary thing. So let's leave that discussion part. I normally say let's execute it unless you have a good fixed deposit. So.
So there is another question from Mr. Javed Parvez. Our typing center whose activity in trade licenses is document clearing services, are these covered?
See, if you are doing a pure typing work, that means you have authority from a regulator perspective to execute the typing job. Then no, you are not covered. But if you do anything other than or in addition to that, let's say example, helping them set up a company, taking the document and submitting for company formation, then you get covered into this. So don't look at only the typing work. Yes, you are not covered if you are only doing a typing job. But if in any case you are associated, even the law has said if you are even submitting the documents on behalf of a client to the regulator, let's say example, I'm not a registered agent, but I support some of my clients. So what I do, I get the documents signed from the client, or I take the client and submit the documents to my email or through my office. Definitely I'm covered. Second point, a lot of times what happens, we raise a bill to the client stating that this is the, let's say, RAC free zone authority bill. and my professional charges is 5,000, and the client happily transfers all the money to my account, and I pass that money to the regulator because of various reasons, either because of geography or they want a single transaction. Again, I'm helping the client to onboard. I'm becoming part of a DNFB. So look at a broader definition. Typing is not covered, but if you're doing anything more than that, then yes, you are part of a DNFB. It's a bigger family now and growing day by day.
Yeah. The next question is for Mr. Pramod. So the question is the web crawl only for English language, or even, you know, the Arabic and other languages are covered in your database? Mr. Pramod, are you there? Okay, Rajiv, so there is a last question for you.
I'll give an answer for this on behalf of Pramod also. First is
please.
UN sanction list is coming in only in English. So there is no multi-language which is coming up. But as Pramod said, what the system or what a lot of systems are doing, not only this system we are talking about, they have a capability of translation and transcription. So both comes into play. Pramod, question was to you. Maybe I'll just rephrase the question. The question was, if we have only Arabic database, will that be covered as part of the listing? So my answer was, normally the international sanction database is coming in English, but however, there are translation and transcriptions which are used in the system. Maybe you can carry forward from.
Yeah, sorry, I got dropped. I joined again. So there is already different languages used in the sources which I said. Can you hear me, Rajiv?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So there are different languages already in the sources. You can check UN source, OFAC source. You will see not just English, different languages being used. So it could be at the source end. When I say source, it means the global sanction list source, and also at your end, because you may not be managing the things, the records in English, mostly in English, but it could be the way that, okay, some of the records you're getting from other systems which are not in the language of English, which you want them to be in. So in that case, also you have to make sure that these records also are scrubbed against the global sanction list, and they should also be checked from the global sanction list source against the languages, regardless of the language. It has to be. Yeah, so regardless of the language, it has to be matched. Firstly, when I say regardless, it means from the global sanction source and the source which is at your end, it has to be translated first in English and then matched against the parameters.
So when you say promote the global sanction list, what all sanction lists are you covering? So one is US, one is UN. Are there any other lists?
United Nations, OFAC, which is of US, which is Office of Foreign Asset Control, and then European Union. Then we have DFAT, which is of Australia, then HMT of UK, Her Majesty Treasury. And also we scrub through the CBI, Interpol, other list also. So it is a regular update. We keep on adding the list as we get the intel on that. Okay, these lists are now serious in the market, that they are good and they can be part of the system. We include that, but bare minimal as far as UAE is concerned, I think you should at least have UN to start with, and if preferred, OFAC and EU also.
Thank you, Pramod. So we can basically close now the Q&A. There's last one question from Mr. Johnman Xavier. Is it that your company monitored more? Wait. Mr. Johnman, why don't you ask when you come? Why can't you come online and ask with Rajiv directly? Just unmute yourself.
Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Rajiv.
Hi, Mr. Johnman. How are you?
Fine. See, I just want just sort of asking you. See, whenever we are taking more consultation from outside, that means you are you are coming under more DNFB monitoring. Am I right on that?
In the sense, yes, because the moment, let's say example, I am a DNFBP and you invite me to do some kind of activity and I find some suspicion in the entity, then definitely it's a challenge which I will also have to counter for. And why I have not highlighted if those are part of a DNFBP activity. Yes, you are right.
Okay,
Now, there's a equal link question with Nishant also has asked, so I will just add up after we conclude on this.
So that means, see, to continue with that, no. So see, it's a type of the risk which I invite. If we are into that kind of business, see, I'm asking you will whenever there is a suspicion, you will not give a tip off. You will have to report on those. So is it that way? If you look at is it going to be like a company which is offshore company? Is it that to be a risk on their side to invite more risk in inviting more people for a service?
No, you are 100% right, but let me give a perspective here. The regulation applies to even employees also. So if employees notice something, they are also supposed to look at what actions need to be done. Even auditors are part of it. You cannot ignore the auditors as part of DNFBPs. Yes, you are right. If there are any services which you are including more, you are on the more watch alert. And on a strategy, you can say if you are into a high risk business and you know you are in a high risk business, involve as much as less external people as possible.
Thank you.
You are helping those DNFBPs to be into trouble at the later stage.
I agree.
So there is a good question which Nishant has also asked. While conducting an audit, if AML officer missed, even after taking adequate precaution or following set procedure, a transaction to report which is subject to reporting and subsequently it was discovered by relevant authority, by bank or otherwise, what will be the consequences? See, again, I think we are talking about a risk-based approach here. So AML is also a risk-based approach. You need to make sure that your documentation is intact to make sure that you are able to demonstrate what kind of a risk-based approach you have adopted. So it's not simply saying that I missed it. So the regulator is definitely going to ask you the procedures which you have and which you have adopted. And if based on that procedure, something got missed, it's missed. So there are consequences. I will not say there are no consequences, but definitely the regulator also takes a due consideration if there is adequate documentation. I always say everyone, imagine a regulator walks in and says, can I have a AML policy which you have? First entity says, I don't have a AML policy. There is a different consequence. Second entity says, I have a AML policy and puts in front of a regulator. The regulator may find few points which are not, I'll say, completely tied in. But you can imagine what kind of a difference of views the regulator will have. Not having is completely disastrous. Having it, I'll say we should be making sure that it is comprehensive, but regulators are regulators. So they may find some gaps. So they take a softer stand. I will not say completely ignore it. So back to you, Ramesh.
So much. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. May I now request our Vice Chairman, say Pramod Kumar Chandji, for the formal vote of thanks. Sir, you are on mute. Chand, sir, you are on mute.
So Ramesh, you can remove me from the spotlight. I think you can do it.
Yeah, sir.
Thank you, Ramesh. So Honorable President of ICI, CA Nihar and Jambu Siriaji, and Chairman of ICI RAC Chapter, CA Manu Mehra, our valued invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of ICI RAC Chapter, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to both the speakers for sharing with us their valuable knowledge on anti-money laundering guidance for designated non-financial businesses and professions. The event started with President CA Nihar and Jambu Siriaji's address to Russell Khema chapter of ICI, followed by CA Rajiv Hira talking about the core principles of Anti-Money Laundering Act. The new requirements through the recent notification is intended to increase countries' effectiveness in combating money laundering and financing of terrorism by adopting a unified national approach. I believe the presentation of Mr. Binod Sharma gave us an insight of how a strong technological framework and advanced analytics will provide effective solutions to mitigate related risks that an economy can face. A big thank you to the speakers, CA Rajiv Hira and Mr. Pramod Sharma, for sharing your wisdom with all of us. And a special thanks to our President, C.A. Nihar Ranjanji, Jambu Seriaji, for taking out time and addressing our chapter. The involvement of the audience has been also very encouraging and speaks volume about the importance of this topic. And in the end, I would like to thank our regular sponsors, Commercial Bank of Dubai, Rack Ceramics, Utico, Lulu, Deloitte, Christian Menon, and Bank of Baroda. And happy Holi to all of you. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your presence. Thank you for attending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I wish you a good Holi and a nice time with the family now.
Happy Holi to all of you. Happy Holi to all of you.
Thank you.